Hello. Mother, something terrible has happened.
The phone rang with the shrill urgency of a siren. I was in the garden, my hands deep in the cool, dark earth, potting new geraniums. It was a peaceful afternoon, the kind of quiet day our family had fought so hard to earn. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered, a smile on my face, expecting to hear from one of the grandchildren. But it was not a child's cheerful hello. It was my daughter Catherine, and her voice was a raw, terrified whisper, stripped of all its usual calm authority. "Mom, I'm hiding him from the police." The words made no sense. Catherine, my pragmatic, rule-following Catherine, did not hide from things. She confronted them. She did not break rules. She wrote them. The world tilted, the scent of geraniums and rich soil suddenly smelling of fear. My daughter, my steady rock, was in trouble. The kind of trouble that you whisper about over a telephone. The kind that starts with breaking the law. Mary's voice softens, becoming the warm, familiar narrator. "Oh, my dears, welcome. I see you have come back for another story. I am so glad. It seems the well of this family's dramas never runs dry. Before we step into the heart of my daughter's crisis, please make yourselves comfortable. It would mean the world to this old woman if you would press that little like button and subscribe to our growing family here. And don't forget to tell me in the comments what corner of the world you are listening from. It brings me such joy now. To understand that phone call, we must go back 6 weeks to a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Of all my children, Catherine is the least complicated. Or so I had always believed. David has the ghost of greed, Eleanor the shadow of control, Samuel the scars of envy, and Benjamin the soul of a turbulent artist. But Catherine had logic. She was a nurse, not just as a profession, but as a state of being. Her world was one of charts and rules and predictable outcomes. She believed that for every problem, there was a procedure, for every wound, a protocol. She was the one who balanced the family checkbook, who organized our holiday gatherings on a spreadsheet, and who, when I once cut my finger while chopping vegetables, calmly stitched it up on the kitchen table before serving dinner. Her heart, I thought, was a tidy, well-organized place, with no room for chaos. She first mentioned the patient with her usual clinical detachment over our weekly Sunday dinner. "We got a new admission on Friday," she said, passing the mashed potatoes. "A John Doe, hit and run, left for dead on the interstate. Severe concussion, fractured tibia, and total retrograde amnesia. He has no idea who he is. My goodness, the poor man," Jessica, my daughter-in-law, said with her characteristic sympathy. "He's a fascinating case," Catherine continued, her eyes bright with professional interest, not emotion. "It's a complete neurological puzzle. We're calling him Leo because he was wearing a St. Leonard's medallion. It's the only clue we have. For the next few weeks, Leo the Lion, as the grandchildren cheekily nicknamed him, became a recurring character in Catherine's reports from the front lines of the hospital. She spoke of his progress, the slow healing of his body, while his mind remained a perfect, frustrating blank. It was always about the case, the puzzle. But then I began to notice a shift. The clinical detachment in her voice was being replaced by something else, a warmth. A frustration that was not purely professional. She was staying later at the hospital. "Just catching up on charting," she'd say, but I knew my daughter. Catherine was never behind on her charting. One afternoon I brought a basket of cookies to the nurses on her floor. I saw her through the window of a patient's room. She was sitting by the bed, not charting, not checking a monitor, but reading aloud from a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, and the man in the bed, a handsome man with a kind, lost look in his eyes, was watching her with an expression of absolute adoration. Catherine, my pragmatic Catherine, was laughing, a soft, unguarded sound that was all too rare for her. When she saw me, a faint blush rose on her cheeks. "Mama," she said, coming out into the hall. "I didn't know you were coming." "Just bringing a thank you to your colleagues," I said lightly. "Your patient seems to be enjoying the story. Leo," she corrected me a little too quickly. "His name is Leo. He gets bored. It helps to keep his mind stimulated." But I had seen her face. It was not the face of a nurse stimulating a patient's mind. It was the face of a woman who had found a place she felt unexpectedly at home. I had seen enough of my children fall in love to know its signs. And I knew this was dangerous. A nurse and a patient, especially a patient with no past and no name, was a story that could not have a happy ending according to any of Catherine's well-laid protocols. The weeks turned into a month. Leo was healing. He was able to walk the halls with a cane. His personality, gentle and witty, had emerged from the fog. But his memory remained a locked room. Catherine was an expert at keeping her professional and personal lives separate, but the wall was crumbling. She spoke of Leo now not as a case, but as a person. She worried about what would happen when he was discharged. Where would a man with no name go? The crisis arrived yesterday. I felt it before I knew it. There was a tension in the air, a feeling of a storm about to break. Catherine was supposed to come for dinner, but canceled at the last minute. A situation at work, she'd said, her voice tight. And now, I know what that situation was. Standing in my garden, with the scent of earth on my hands and my daughter's terrified voice in my ear, I finally understood. The locked room in Leo's mind had been opened, and whatever he had found inside was something so terrible, so dangerous, that my rule-following daughter had chosen to break the most important rule of all. She had chosen to hide a man from the law. She had chosen a person over her principles. The puzzle was solved, and the answer was threatening to destroy her, of course. The call had been made. The crisis was no longer impending. It was here. Let us walk through the heart of the storm, into the hospital ward where my daughter's carefully ordered world came undone. My first instinct, standing there with dirt on my hands and ice in my veins, was not to panic. A queen who panics loses her kingdom. My voice, when I answered my daughter, was steady, a calm anchor against her rising tide of fear. "Catherine, breathe," I commanded softly. "Now tell me where you are and tell me if you are safe." I'm in the car," she stammered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "We're on the old highway heading out of the city. I think we're safe for now." "Oh, Mama, what have I done?" "You have made a choice," I said, my voice firm. "Now tell me why you made it. Tell me everything that happened." From the beginning, and so she did. Through a torrent of tears and frightened whispers, she painted a picture of the last 24 hours, and as she spoke, the image of my pragmatic, logical daughter dissolved, replaced by a woman I had never met. A woman capable of immense love and terrifying recklessness. It had started, as most disasters do, on a perfectly normal afternoon. She was in his room changing his IV drip. Leo, as we all called him, was smiling, telling her a funny, nonsensical story he'd invented about what his life might have been like. He was a master storyteller, a man who could weave beautiful tales to fill the empty space where his memories should have been. The television was on in the corner, a local news program playing quietly. Suddenly, the news anchor began a story about the city's ongoing efforts to dismantle the notorious Varga crime syndicate. My blood ran cold as Catherine said the name. It was the same criminal enterprise that my son David, in his foolish, greedy youth, had become entangled with, a connection that had almost cost him his freedom and our family its reputation. We thought we had excised that cancer from our lives years ago. The news report flashed a series of photographs of key players in the syndicate. And that is when it happened. On the screen, a picture of a smiling, dark-haired man appeared. The caption beneath it read, "Milos Varga, brother of syndicate leader Stefan Varga." Leo froze. The teacup in his hand slipped, shattering on the linoleum floor. His face went white as a sheet, his eyes fixed on the screen. He began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shaking. "Milos," he whispered, his voice a choked, unfamiliar sound. And then, like a dam breaking, it all came back. Not gently, but in a brutal, agonizing flood of images, sounds, and names. He cried out, clutching his head, his face a mask of pure terror. Catherine, the nurse, took over immediately. She called for a sedative, cleared the room, and did her best to calm her patient, who was now thrashing in the bed, screaming a name over and over again. "Michael. My name is Michael." His name was Michael Thorne, and he was not a criminal. He was the chief accountant for one of the Varga family's legitimate front companies. For years he had been a model employee, unaware of the rot that lay beneath the surface. But he was smart, too smart, and he had stumbled upon the truth, a second set of books, a complex web of money laundering that financed the syndicate's darkest operations. Horrified, he had decided to go to the police. He had spent weeks secretly copying files, building a case. Milos Varga, the man in the photograph, had been his direct superior and, Michael had thought, his friend. It was Milos who discovered his betrayal. The hit and run had not been an accident. It had been a failed execution, As Michael's story poured out of him in a panicked, disjointed torrent, Catherine's mind was racing. Her protocol was clear. An identified John Doe, the victim of a violent crime, must be reported to the authorities immediately. She reached for the phone on the wall to call hospital security. But Michael grabbed her arm, his eyes wild with a fear that went beyond his trauma. "No," he pleaded. "Catherine, no police. They'll kill me. The Vargas have men everywhere, even inside the force." It was a police dispatcher who tipped them off that I was going to the DA in the first place. "If you call them, you're not saving me. You're signing my death certificate." And that was the moment. The moment my daughter stood on the knife's edge between the worlds she knew, of rules and procedures and orderly consequences, and a new world, a terrifying world where the only rule was to protect the man she loved. She looked into his eyes, and she saw not a patient, not a case study, but the man who had listened to her talk about her stressful family, the man whose hand she had held during lonely night shifts, the man whose invented stories had made her laugh. Her training screamed at her to make the call. Her heart screamed louder. She made her choice. What followed, as she described it to me, was a masterpiece of calculated nerve. My pragmatic, detail-oriented daughter used every bit of her procedural knowledge to break every procedure. She found a blank discharge form and forged a doctor's signature writing that Leo was being transferred to a private long-term care facility. She gathered his few belongings. She timed her exit to coincide with the busiest shift change when the halls were a chaotic swirl of doctors and nurses. She walked him past the very security desk she was supposed to have called, her arm linked through his, presenting a perfect picture of a dedicated nurse seeing a patient safely on his way. No one looked twice, and now she was in her car on a highway to nowhere, with a man who was a witness to a terrible crime, a man whose past was fatally intertwined with her own family's, a man the police were looking for, and a man the mob wanted dead. "He's asleep," she whispered into the phone, her voice cracking. "The sedative is still working. But I don't know where to go, Mama. Every direction I turn feels like a trap." I closed my eyes, picturing the map of our lives, of our properties, of our secrets. Her apartment was the first place they would look. Our home was the second. David's, Eleanor's, all of them were compromised. But there was one place, a place of painful memories, a place no one had set foot in for years, a place so far off the map it had been forgotten by everyone, a place that was now their only hope. "Listen to me very carefully, Catherine," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Stop the car and turn off your phone. Turn it back on in 1 hour for my next instruction. We will do this in stages. For now, there is only one direction. Start driving north toward the old lake. And do not, under any circumstances, speak to anyone else." I hung up the phone. The geraniums in my garden suddenly looked fragile, their cheerful red blooms a mockery of the danger my daughter was in. I had a promise to keep, a promise to a dying husband to always provide a refuge. I had just never imagined the enemy would be this great, or that the child seeking refuge would be my unshakable Catherine. Of course, a plan is only as strong as the will behind it, and in that moment, my will was iron. Let us continue down that dark road. After I hung up the phone, I did not stand frozen in the garden. I moved. Action is the only antidote to fear. I washed the soil from my hands, my motions precise and automatic. My mind, however, was a whirlwind, sorting through decades of memories, strategies, and secrets. I was no longer just a mother. I was a general, and my daughter was a soldier trapped behind enemy lines. My objective was clear: bring her to safety. But to do that, I had to understand the enemy. And in this family, there was only one person who truly knew the depravity of the Vargas syndicate. I had to talk to David. This was the most dangerous move of all. To speak of the Vargas to David was to reopen the deepest, most shameful wound of his life. It was to remind the redeemed man of the greedy, foolish one he had once been. But I had no choice. Catherine's life depended on his knowledge. I found him in the study, the same room that had been the stage for so many of our family's dramas, reviewing financial reports. He looked up, a placid, businesslike smile on his face. The smile vanished when he saw my expression. "Mama, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse, David," I said, closing the heavy doors behind me. "I have seen a ghost of yours." I told him everything. I kept my voice low and even, reporting the facts as Catherine had given them to me. The John Doe patient, the recovered memory, the name Michael Thorne, and the name that hung in the air between us like poison gas, Varga. As I spoke, the color drained from David's face. The successful, confident man I saw every day disappeared, and in his place was a much younger, much more frightened version of my son. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around the room as if the walls were closing in. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, it can't be. I cut all ties. I paid my dues. They promised. Promises from men like that are worthless, and you know it," I said, my voice sharp. "I do not care about your past right now, David. I care about your sister's present. She is in a car with the man who can bring them down. Tell me right now what that means. Tell me what they are capable of." David stood up and began to pace the room like a caged animal. "Capable of?" he repeated, his voice a ragged whisper. "Mama, they are not just thugs. Stefan Varga is a monster who wears a tailored suit. When I was involved, I saw things. Men who asked too many questions, who simply disappeared. They don't just kill their enemies. They erase them. They have a network that runs so deep, you don't know who to trust. Police, judges, city officials. If they know this man, Michael Thorne, is alive, they will not stop. They will never stop." His fear was a raw, palpable thing. It was more terrifying than anything Catherine had said. This was not a story from the news. This was a monster he had met face to face. "They will be looking for Catherine," he said, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "They will connect her to him. They will connect him to us, to me." The old selfishness, the instinct for self-preservation, flickered in his eyes. For a horrifying second, I saw the ghost of the man he used to be. But then he looked at me, and he saw not a business associate, but his mother. He saw his sister's life hanging in the balance. The fear in his eyes did not vanish, but it was joined by something else, resolve. His redemption had been real. "Okay," he said, his voice stronger now. "Okay, we need a plan." "The lake cottage. Is that where you're sending her?" I nodded. "It's the only place they won't think to look. It has been off the family books for years, a forgotten place." "It's not enough," he said, shaking his head. "It's isolated. It's a trap if they find it. We need to get them out of the country. I still have contacts, ways of moving people quietly." While he paced and planned, my mind was with Catherine. I pictured her in her small car, driving through the deepening twilight on a lonely highway. My daughter, the one who always had a map, a schedule, a procedure. She was now driving into a complete unknown, her life guided only by a series of short, cryptic instructions from her mother. The man beside her, the man whose gentle stories had charmed her heart, was now a source of mortal danger, his very presence a magnet for violence. Every passing headlight, every shadow on the road would be a potential threat, and yet she kept driving. She was protecting him. My daughter, the nurse, had become my daughter, the lioness. David stopped pacing. He looked at me, his face grim but clear. "I need to make a call," he said. "To someone I swore I would never contact again. It's a risk, but he's the only one who might know what Varga's people are doing, who they have on their payroll. I need to know what kind of army is coming for my sister." He picked up the phone, his hand hesitating for a moment over the keypad. He was not just making a call. He was stepping back into the underworld he had fought so hard to escape. For his sister, for us. "And you, Mama," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "You need to call Catherine. It's been an hour. She'll be waiting." I pulled out my own phone, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had sent her into the wilderness. Now I had to guide her through it, hoping that her brother's ghost would not consume them all before she reached the safety of the shore. The next call would be a message of hope, but the one after that, I feared, would be a declaration of war. Of course. The pieces are in motion. The night is long, and the refuge is still far away. Let us continue. The study felt like a war room. David stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his back rigid. I watched him, my heart a tangle of fear and a fierce, painful pride. He was risking his hard-won peace, willingly stepping back into the shadows to protect his sister. At the same time, I took out my own phone. My finger hovered over Catherine's name. For a moment, the enormity of what I was asking of her, what I was commanding her to do, settled upon me. I was leading her deeper into a wilderness from which there might be no return. I pushed the thought away. Now was not the time for doubt. Now was the time for strategy. I pressed the call button. She answered on the first ring, her voice a strained whisper. "Mama, I'm here," I said, my voice low and steady. "Are you still heading north?" "Yes, we just passed Millersburg. The road is dark. I keep thinking every car behind me is them. Do not think. Just drive, I instructed, my words precise. In approximately 20 miles, you will see mile marker 72. Immediately after it, there is an old, overgrown service road on the right. It looks like nothing, like a dirt track. Turn there. The road is rough, but it is passable. It will take you to the lake, to the old cottage. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and I knew why. The lake cottage. It was a place of ghosts for our family, a place defined by a 30-year-old lie, a place we had never returned to, a place no one would ever think to look for one of us. The cottage, she breathed. It's still there? It is. Park the car deep in the trees, as far from the road as you can. Walk the rest of the way. By the front porch steps, there is a large flat stone. The key is underneath it. Get inside, lock the door, and do not, under any circumstances, turn on a single light or light a single fire. Do you understand me, Catherine? Yes, Mama, she whispered. I understand. I will be there before dawn. Stay hidden. Stay quiet. And Catherine, be brave, I ended the call. Across the room, David had finished his. He slowly lowered the phone, his face pale, his expression grim. It was the face of a man who had looked into the abyss and seen a familiar monster staring back. They're moving, he said, his voice barely audible. My contact confirmed it. The Vargas know he's alive, and they know he was at County General. They have men watching the hospital, the airports, the bus stations. They've put a whisper out on the street, a bounty for anyone who can find him. A bounty. My daughter was in a car with a man who had a price on his head. We have a few hours, maybe, David continued, thinking aloud. They won't expect a nurse to be the one to get him out. They'll be looking for professionals, for other criminals. That's our only advantage. While my son wrestled with the present danger, my thoughts were with my daughter on her lonely drive. I imagined her, my pragmatic Catherine, navigating by mile markers and forgotten roads, her medical training useless, her knowledge of procedures replaced by the cold, hard instincts of a fugitive. The man beside her, Michael, was likely awake now. What must that be like? To be in a stranger's car, your own past a weapon aimed at you, your only protector the woman whose life you had irrevocably destroyed, just by remembering your own name. They would be arriving soon. I pictured the cottage exactly as we had left it all those years ago. The air thick with the smell of dust and damp wood, the furniture draped in white sheets like sleeping ghosts, the windows blind with grime. It was a house of painful memories, but tonight it had to be a sanctuary. In that dusty silence, they would finally have a moment to breathe. A moment for the nurse and her patient to become simply a man and a woman, bound together by a terrible danger. In that moment, I knew the bond between them would either shatter under the strain or be forged into something unbreakable. David let out a harsh, bitter laugh. He looked at me, and there was a new kind of terror in his eyes, something beyond the threat of Vargas' men. There's more, he said, his voice cracking. The bounty is only half of it. Stefan Varga is not a man who leaves things to chance. He is not just using criminals to hunt for them. What do you mean? I asked, a cold dread seeping into my bones. He used his influence, David said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. My contact said the police just issued a bolo, be on the lookout, for Michael Thorne. He is now officially a person of interest in the disappearance of a key witness in a federal investigation. The witness is him, I said, confused. Exactly, David replied, his eyes dark with the awful truth. They've flipped it. They've made him the suspect. But that's not the worst of it, Mama. He took a shaky breath. The bolo is for two people. For Michael Thorne and for his accomplice, an unnamed nurse from the hospital, now wanted for questioning in his abduction. They've framed her. The world narrowed to a single sharp point of fury. My daughter, my brave, foolish, noble daughter. She had broken the law to save a man's life, and now the law was hunting her as a kidnapper. They were not just hiding from the mob. They were hiding from everyone. They were utterly, completely alone. I looked at David, my son, who had once walked in these same shadows, and he saw the look on my face. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was the cold, hard calm of a mother who had just been handed a declaration of war. They had not just come for the witness. They had come for my daughter. And in doing so, they had just made an enemy of a woman who had spent a lifetime fighting for her family, a woman with nothing left to lose. The rules of the game had changed, and so had I. Continue. The declaration of war has been made. Now, the first battle plans must be drawn in the shadows of my quiet home. The news that my daughter was now a fugitive, a name on a police bulletin, did not break me. It focused me. Fear, you see, can be a paralyzing fog or a clarifying fire. I chose fire. The Varga Syndicate had made a fatal error. They had mistaken a mother's love for a weakness, when in fact it is the most formidable and ruthless force on earth. They had come for my child. I would come for their kingdom. "All right," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence in the study. David looked at me, his face a mask of despair.
"We do not have time for grief," I told him.
"Grief is a luxury for after the war is won. Right now, we need a strategy." My mind was already moving, piecing together the next steps. While I fortified our defenses at home, my daughter was finding her own strength in the dusty silence of the lake cottage. Catherine told me later about those first few hours. After the terror of the drive, the chilling silence of the abandoned cottage was a strange kind of comfort. She found an old oil lamp, and its soft, flickering light pushed back the darkness, creating a small island of sanctuary in the vast, forgotten house. Michael, no longer Leo, was quiet, watching her with haunted eyes as she moved through the room with a nurse's efficiency. She found old blankets in a cedar chest, shaking out the dust and the scent of mothballs. She found a half-empty bottle of water in her car and made him drink. He finally broke the silence, his voice rough with guilt. "Catherine, I am so sorry. I've destroyed your life, your career, your freedom, everything." My daughter, the woman who had lived her life by a code of conduct, who had never so much as received a parking ticket, was now a wanted criminal. And yet when she looked at the man she had saved, she felt no regret. The pragmatism that had once governed her life had not disappeared. It had simply been given a new, singular purpose: his survival. He picked up the phone, his hand hesitating for a moment over the keypad. He was not just making a call. He was stepping back into the underworld he had fought so hard to escape. For his sister. For us. "And you, Mama," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "You need to call Catherine. It's been an hour. She'll be waiting." I pulled out my own phone, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had sent her into the wilderness. Now I had to guide her through it, hoping that her brother's ghosts would not consume them all before she reached the safety of the shore. The next call would be a message of hope, but the one after that, I feared, would be a declaration of war. Of course. The pieces are in motion. The night is long and the refuge is still far away. Let us continue. The study felt like a war room. David stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his back rigid. I watched him, my heart a tangle of fear and a fierce, painful pride. He was risking his hard-won peace, willingly stepping back into the shadows to protect his sister. At the same time, I took out my own phone. My finger hovered over Catherine's name. For a moment, the enormity of what I was asking of her, what I was commanding her to do, settled upon me. I was leading her deeper into a wilderness from which there might be no return. I pushed the thought away. Now was not the time for doubt. Now was the time for strategy. I pressed the call button. She answered on the first ring, her voice a strained whisper. "Mama, I'm here," I said, my voice low and steady. "Are you still heading north?" "Yes, we just passed Millersburg. The road is dark. I keep thinking every car behind me is them." "Do not think. Just drive," I instructed, my words precise. "In approximately 20 miles, you will see mile marker 72. Immediately after it, there is an old, overgrown service road on the right. It looks like nothing, like a dirt track. Turn there. The road is rough, but it is passable. It will take you to the lake, to the old cottage." There was a silence on the other end of the line, and I knew why. The lake cottage. It was a place of ghosts for our family, a place defined by a 30-year-old lie, a place we had never returned to, a place no one would ever think to look for one of us. "The cottage," she breathed. "It's still there?" "It is. Park the car deep in the trees, as far from the road as you can. Walk the rest of the way. By the front porch steps there is a large flat stone. The key is underneath it. Get inside, lock the door, and do not, under any circumstances, turn on a single light or light a single fire. Do you understand me, Catherine?" "Yes, Mama," she whispered. "I understand. I will be there before dawn. Stay hidden, stay quiet. And Catherine, be brave." I ended the call. Across the room, David had finished his. He slowly lowered the phone, his face pale, his expression grim. It was the face of a man who had looked into the abyss and seen a familiar monster staring back. "They're moving," he said, his voice barely audible. My contact confirmed it. "The Vargas know he's alive, and they know he was at County General. They have men watching the hospital, the airports, the bus stations."
They've put a whisper out on the street. A bounty for anyone who can find him. A bounty.
My daughter was in a car with a man who had a price on his head. "We have a few hours, maybe," David continued, thinking aloud. "They won't expect a nurse to be the one to get him out. They'll be looking for professionals, for other criminals. That's our only advantage." While my son wrestled with the present danger, my thoughts were with my daughter on her lonely drive. I imagined her, my pragmatic Catherine, navigating by mile markers and forgotten roads, her medical training useless, her knowledge of procedures replaced by the cold, hard instincts of a fugitive. The man beside her, Michael, was likely awake now. What must that be like? To be in a stranger's car, your own past a weapon aimed at you. Your only protector the woman whose life you had irrevocably destroyed just by remembering your own name. They would be arriving soon. I pictured the cottage, exactly as we had left it all those years ago. The air thick with the smell of dust and damp wood. The furniture draped in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. The windows blind with grime. It was a house of painful memories, but tonight it had to be a sanctuary. In that dusty silence, they would finally have a moment to breathe. A moment for the nurse and her patient to become simply a man and a woman, bound together by a terrible danger. In that moment, I knew the bond between them would either shatter under the strain or be forged into something unbreakable. David let out a harsh, bitter laugh. He looked at me, and there was a new kind of terror in his eyes, something beyond the threat of Varga's men. "There's more," he said, his voice cracking. "The bounty is only half of it. Stefan Varga is not a man who leaves things to chance. He is not just using criminals to hunt for them." "What do you mean?" I asked, a cold dread seeping into my bones. "He used his influence," David said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "My contact said the police just issued a bolo, be on the lookout, for Michael Thorne. He is now officially a person of interest in the disappearance of a key witness in a federal investigation." "The witness is him," I said. "Confused." "Exactly," David replied, his eyes dark with the awful truth. "They've flipped it. They've made him the suspect. But that's not the worst of it, Mama." He took a shaky breath. "The bolo is for two people, for Michael Thorne and for his accomplice. An unnamed nurse from the hospital now wanted for questioning in his abduction. They've framed her." The world narrowed to a single sharp point of fury. My daughter, my brave, foolish, noble daughter. She had broken the law to save a man's life, and now the law was hunting her as a kidnapper. They were not just hiding from the mob. They were hiding from everyone. They were utterly, completely alone. I looked at David, my son who had once walked in these same shadows, and he saw the look on my face. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was the cold, hard calm of a mother who had just been handed a declaration of war. They had not just come for the witness. They had come for my daughter. And in doing so, they had just made an enemy of a woman who had spent a lifetime fighting for her family, a woman with nothing left to lose. The rules of the game had changed, and so had I. Continue. The declaration of war has been made. Now the first battle plans must be drawn in the shadows of my quiet home. The news that my daughter was now a fugitive, a name on a police bulletin, did not break me. It focused me. Fear, you see, can be a paralyzing fog or a clarifying fire. I chose fire. The Vargas syndicate had made a fatal error. They had mistaken a mother's love for a weakness, when in fact, it is the most formidable and ruthless force on earth. They had come for my child. I would come for their kingdom. "All right," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence in the study. David looked at me, his face a mask of despair. "We do not have time for grief," I told him. "Grief is a luxury for after the war is won. Right now, we need a strategy." My mind was already moving, piecing together the next steps. While I fortified our defenses at home, my daughter was finding her own strength in the dusty silence of the lake cottage. Catherine told me later about those first few hours. After the terror of the drive, the chilling silence of the abandoned cottage was a strange kind of comfort. She found an old oil lamp, and its soft flickering light pushed back the darkness, creating a small island of sanctuary in the vast, forgotten house. Michael, no longer Leo, was quiet. watching her with haunted eyes as she moved through the room with a nurse's efficiency. She found old blankets in a cedar chest, shaking out the dust and the scent of mothballs. She found a half-empty bottle of water in her car and made him drink. He finally broke the silence, his voice rough with guilt. "Catherine, I am so sorry. I've destroyed your life, your career, your freedom, everything. My daughter, the woman who had lived her life by a code of conduct, who had never so much as received a parking ticket, was now a wanted criminal. And yet, when she looked at the man she had saved, she felt no regret. The pragmatism that had once governed her life had not disappeared. It had simply been given a new singular purpose, his survival. "You didn't destroy anything, Michael," she told him, her voice steady, surprising even herself. "You gave me something. I spent my whole life following the rules, believing they would keep me safe. I was wrong. The rules don't protect you from the monsters. I'm done with the rules." In that dusty, forgotten room, they were no longer a nurse and a patient. They were two fugitives, allies bound by a shared danger. In saving him, my daughter had finally, truly found herself. Back at the house, I was assembling my army. I called a meeting, not the whole family, but the core. My generals, David with his knowledge of the enemy, Eleanor with her unmatched skill for logistics, and Samuel, my quiet son, whose newfound peace had given him a steady, empathetic strength the rest of us sometimes lacked. I laid out the entire situation in the study. I told them everything, the bounty, the police warrant, the fact that Catherine was now considered a kidnapper. I watched their faces as the reality of the situation sunk in. Eleanor's face went white with a controlled fury. Samuel's filled with a sorrowful resolve. This was no longer just Catherine's problem. An attack on one of them was an attack on all of them. The fractures in our family, so recently and painfully mended, were now sealed tight by a common enemy. "We have two objectives," I announced, my voice leaving no room for debate. "First, survival. Second, victory. Eleanor, you are in charge of survival." Eleanor, who had spent her life organizing parties and family vacations, now turned her formidable skills to the logistics of sustaining two fugitives. "They need food, water, medical supplies," she began, already making a list. "Burner phones for communication, cash. Everything must be untraceable. I'll make a supply run, but I'll buy the items from a dozen different stores in 3 different towns. No patterns, David," I said, turning to him. "You are in charge of victory. Hiding is not enough. We cannot run forever. We need to fight back. This man, Michael, he has evidence. He told Catherine he copied files," I explained. "The proof of their money laundering. If we can get that evidence to the right people, someone outside of Varga's sphere of influence, the FBI perhaps, we can exonerate Catherine and destroy them at the same time." "But where are the files?" Samuel asked, voicing the critical question. "If he has amnesia about the accident, then his memory is our battlefield," David said, his mind already working the angles. "We need to get him stable, get him talking. Find out what he remembers about the days leading up to the attack. The evidence has to be somewhere." Our strategy was set. A 2-pronged attack, one logistical, one strategic. While Eleanor planned her clandestine supply run, a mission more suited to a spy than a suburban mother, David began to work his old contacts, mapping out the Varga empire, looking for a weakness, a pressure point. The night wore on. The house was quiet, but it was alive with a silent, determined energy. We were no longer just a family. We were a conspiracy, bound by love and a shared mortal danger. As the first hint of dawn threatened to break, Eleanor came to me with her finished plan. The supplies were mapped out, the route was planned, the alibis were in place. "I can leave in an hour," she said. I looked at my daughter, her face tired but resolute, and I felt a wave of love so fierce it was almost painful. But I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "You will not go. Nor will David or Samuel. Your faces are too well known. Your cars are too familiar. If anyone is being watched, it is one of you." "Then who, Mama?" Eleanor asked, confused. "We can't just leave her there." I stood up and went to the hall closet, retrieving my old tweed driving coat and a simple headscarf. "The one person they will never suspect," I said, turning back to face my shocked children. "An old woman driving an old car, going to visit a friend by the lake. I am the only one who can do this without raising suspicion. I will go." It was not a suggestion. It was a command. I was the queen of this family, and it is the queen who must sometimes put herself on the front line to protect her kingdom. My children could plan the battle, but I would be the one to carry the shield. I would go to my daughter. I would look this new danger in the eye, and I would bring her the supplies she needed to survive the night. Continue. The decision was made. The sun was not yet up, but in the quiet of my home, a new and dangerous day had already begun. The hour before dawn is a time of ghosts. As I loaded the trunk of my old, unassuming sedan, the air was cold and damp, filled with the memories of 1,000 other mornings. Mornings of packing for family vacations, of driving children to early sports games, of a life so ordinary it now seemed like a distant, impossible dream. Today, the bags I packed were not filled with sandwiches and beach towels, but with the tools of a fugitive's survival. Tins of food, bottles of water, a comprehensive first aid kit, a thick wool blanket, and 2 untraceable burner phones, still in their plastic packaging. At the very bottom of the bag, wrapped in an old oilcloth, lay a small, heavy object. It was Arthur's old revolver from his time as a young officer. I had not laid eyes on it in 40 years, but I had never forgotten where he kept it. My hands did not tremble as I placed it in the bag. The woman who baked cookies was gone. The woman who would protect her child at any cost was driving the car now. The drive north was a journey through a world that had become alien. Every passing set of headlights felt like an accusation. I saw a state trooper's car parked on the shoulder and my heart seized, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. He did not move. I drove on, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. I was a ghost, an old woman in a headscarf, invisible, and that invisibility was my only shield. I thought of Catherine. I wondered if she had slept, if she had eaten, if the man she was protecting understood the sacrifice she was making. My pragmatic daughter had always believed in the clear, bright lines of the law. Now, I had sent her into the gray, murky shadows, and I did not know if she would ever find her way back to the light. I found the service road, a nearly invisible scar in the dense woods, just as I had described it. The old car bumped and scraped along the rutted track, branches clawing at the windows. I parked it in a thicket of pines, the darkness so complete it felt like I was drowning. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the frantic beating of my heart. I took the bags from the trunk and began the walk. The cottage emerged from the trees like a half-remembered dream. It was a dark, sagging shape against the faintly glowing sky. No light, no sound. As I approached the porch, my footfalls muffled by the pine needles, the door creaked open. A silhouette stood in the doorway. It was my daughter. We did not rush into each other's arms. We did not weep. We stood for a moment, 2 soldiers meeting on a dark and lonely battlefield, and in that silent gaze, everything was understood. The fear, the love, the grim resolve. She took one of the bags from my hand, and I stepped across the threshold into the cold, dusty air of the past. The single oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. In a corner, sitting on a sheet-draped chair, was Michael. He rose to his feet as I entered, his face pale in the lamplight. He looked younger than I had imagined, and the guilt in his eyes was so profound it was almost a physical presence. "Mrs. Davies," he said, his voice quiet. There are no words to say how sorry I am." I looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time. I saw not the cause of my daughter's ruin, but the reason for her transformation. I saw the kindness in his face that she must have seen, the gentle soul that was now trapped in a violent nightmare. He was not a monster. He was just a man, and my daughter loved him. In that moment, he ceased to be a liability. He became one of my own. "There will be time for apologies when this is over," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "For now we must eat, and we must think." We sat around a dusty old table, the 3 of us, and ate cold food from tins. It was the most important meal of our lives. I gave them the burner phone, explaining the plan Eleanor and David had formulated. Stay put, stay hidden, while we worked on a way to fight back. "The evidence, Michael," I said, getting to the heart of the matter. "The files you copied. David believes it's our only weapon. Where is it?" He closed his eyes, his brow furrowing in concentration. "It's not clear," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "The accident. It knocked things loose. I know I had it. I know I hid it somewhere safe right before I was supposed to meet the DA. I didn't want to have it on me when I went in. It was a flash drive. Everything was on it. Where?" David's voice would have been demanding. Mine was patient. "Try to remember, Michael. any detail, no matter how small. He was silent for a long time, his eyes closed, journeying back into the fog of his memory. Catherine watched him, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "A locker," he said finally, his eyes snapping open. "Yes, at a bus station, the big one downtown. I put the drive in an envelope and put it in a public locker." "The key?" I pressed gently. He shook his head, another wave of frustration crossing his face. "I can't see it. I can't remember what I did with the key. It was close. It had to be somewhere safe, somewhere I wouldn't lose it." He looked down at his own hands, then at the simple hospital-issue clothes he was wearing. "The clothes they gave me at the hospital. They're not mine. They had to cut my own clothes off me in the ER." He stopped, his eyes widening with a sudden electrifying spark of memory. "My coat," he whispered, looking from me to Catherine. "My winter coat. There's a small tear in the inner lining, right by the pocket. I sewed a tiny hidden pouch there myself, years ago, to hide emergency money. It's the safest place I could think of. The key." I stitched the key into the lining of my coat. We all stared at him. The key. The key to their freedom, to Catherine's exoneration, to the Varga Syndicate's downfall. It existed, but a cold, terrible reality descended upon us in that dusty room. His coat. The one he was wearing when he was the victim of a near-fatal hit-and-run. The coat that was now a piece of evidence in a major criminal investigation. The coat that was almost certainly sealed in an evidence bag, locked deep inside the one place on earth we could not go, the city police headquarters. We had found the path to victory, and it led directly into the heart of the enemy's fortress. Continue. The path was revealed, and it was a path that led through fire. But my family has always been forged in fire. This would be no different. The silence that fell in the cottage was heavier than the dust of 30 years. It was the silence of an impossible truth. The key, the single object that held the promise of their freedom, was locked away in a place more impregnable than any bank vault. It was in the belly of the beast. Michael slumped in his chair, the brief spark of hope in his eyes extinguished, replaced by a profound despair. "It's over," he whispered. "There's no way. We can't get to it." Catherine, my pragmatic daughter, stood and began to pace the small room, her mind clicking through possibilities and discarding them just as quickly. "There has to be a way. A lawyer? A legal petition to have personal effects returned?" "You are a wanted fugitive, my dear," I reminded her gently. "And he is the man they say you kidnapped. Any legal petition would be a signed confession that would lead them straight to this door." For a moment we were adrift. 3 people in a forgotten room, checkmated by a cruel twist of fate. But I am not a woman who accepts checkmate. I am a woman who flips the board over. I picked up the burner phone. It was time for our war council to reconvene. I laid out the situation for David and Eleanor, my voice a flat, unemotional report. "We know the location of the key. It is in Michael's coat, inside a police evidence locker at the downtown precinct." The phone was silent for a long moment. Then, David's voice, strained with disbelief. "Mama, that's not a fortress. That's a black hole. Nothing comes out of there. You need court orders, chains of custody? It's impossible." "I am not interested in what is impossible, David," I said, my voice cold as steel. "I am interested in what is necessary. The key is necessary. Therefore, we will find a way." This I knew was a different kind of problem. It could not be solved with logistics or supplies. This required a different kind of knowledge, a knowledge of the system's cracks, its dirty secrets. "David," I said, my tone shifting, "in your former life you did not only deal with criminals. You dealt with the people who kept them out of jail, lawyers, clerks, the people who oil the machine. Is there anyone from that life, anyone who owes you a favor? Or more likely, anyone who is desperate enough for money to help us understand what we are up against?" There was another long silence. I could hear him thinking, dredging up ghosts from a past he had tried so hard to bury. "There might be one person," he said finally, his voice hesitant. "His name is Silas. He was a clerk in the evidence department. A bitter man. Got fired a few years back for stealing petty cash. He knows the building, the protocols, the blind spots. But he's unreliable, Mama, and he will cost a fortune. Money is a renewable resource," I said. "Your sister's life is not. Find him." What followed was a tense 24-hour dance in the shadows. David, using a burner phone of his own, tracked down the disgraced clerk. He met him in a dimly lit bar on the edge of town. There was no talk of favors. David placed a briefcase filled with cash on the table. In return, Silas, with a greedy, triumphant smile, drew a map on the back of a napkin and laid out the blueprint for the impossible. He told David of a 15-minute window, between 2:45 and 3 a.m., when the single, lazy night guard takes his break in the main building, leaving the annex, the evidence warehouse, unwatched. He told him of a faulty sensor on a loading bay door and a security camera that has been on a loop for the past 6 months. He could not get them in, but he had given them a keyhole. Now, we had to find a way to slip through it. The question was, who? It could not be me. It could not be David, whose face was too well known. It could not be Eleanor. My mind settled on the two most unlikely soldiers in my army. I called them to the house that evening. My gentle artist Benjamin still shadowed by the shame of his near betrayal, and my quiet, steadfast Samuel, a man who had spent his life feeling overlooked. They stood before me in the study, their expressions wary. They thought I had summoned them for another lecture. I was summoning them for a mission. I need you, I said simply without preamble. Your sister's life and the future of this family may depend on what happens in the next few hours. I need your courage, and I need your silence. I laid out Silas's map on Arthur's desk. I explained the 15-minute window, the faulty door, the camera loop. I told them what they had to find, a sealed evidence bag tagged with a specific case number that David's contact had managed to retrieve. I watched their faces. I saw fear, yes, but I also saw something else. I saw the ghosts of two little boys who had always wanted to be heroes for their family. Benjamin, the artist, looked at the hand-drawn map, his keen eye for detail and space already memorizing the layout. Samuel, the quiet one, simply squared his shoulders and nodded, a silent acceptance of the duty he was being given. After years in the background, he was being called to the front line. The plan was set. They would go. Eleanor would be their getaway driver, parked 2 blocks away. David would be at home, ready to anonymously call in a false alarm to a different precinct if a diversion was needed. And I would be their eye in Thesky. As midnight approached, I sat in my old car, parked in the shadows of an alleyway across the street from the dark, brutalist cube of the police evidence warehouse. I had a burner phone in my hand, an open line to Benjamin's pocket. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I watched my 2 sons, dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, pull their hats down low and walk out of the darkness. They looked like strangers. They looked like criminals. My heart ached with a terrible, beautiful irony. To save my daughter from a crime she did not commit, I was now sending my sons to commit a very real one. I watched them slip into the shadows of the loading bay, my 2 unlikely heroes, disappearing into the lion's den. And I waited every second an eternity for the roar. The engine of my car was silent, but the roar in my ears was deafening. It was the sound of my own heart, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the night. The open line on the burner phone in my hand was a thread connecting me to my sons, a thread that felt as thin and fragile as a spider's silk. I could hear their breathing, shallow and quick. I could hear the faint scuff of their shoes on concrete, and I could hear the vast echoing silence of the place they had just entered. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene, my mind following them into the darkness, my soul walking beside them. Of course, let us revisit that final fateful night and retell it in its original tongue. Here is the conclusion to Catherine's story. The deepest, darkest hour of the night is that moment just before the false dawn, when the world seems to hold its breath. It was in that silence that Eleanor's car pulled onto the back street, and my sons slipped into the house like 2 ghosts returning from war. They spoke no words. Benjamin simply placed the canvas duffel bag on the kitchen table. The heavy, dark wool coat he pulled from it was an object of death, stained and stiff. The silence in the room was that of reverence before a tomb. With my grandmother's sewing scissors, I carefully snipped the stitches on the inner seam of the lining, a small patch that felt thicker than the rest. My fingers, gnarled with age, found something small, cold and hard. I pulled it into the light. A tiny metal key, the key to a bus station locker. The key to everything, we had it, and yet we had never been in greater danger. The relief was swallowed by a wave of dread. David, who was monitoring the police scanners, gave us the news we expected. "It's been discovered," he said, his face pale. "A break-in at the police evidence warehouse. It's all over the channels. They're treating it as a major security threat. Every off-duty officer has been called in. The city was on high alert." The bus station, a public hub, would be swarming with surveillance. To send any of us would be suicide. Benjamin and Samuel would be recognized from any security camera. Catherine's face was being broadcast on the news. Myself, David, Eleanor, we were easy targets. We were trapped, with the key to our salvation in our hands, but unable to reach the lock. It was then that Jessica, David's wife, my quiet, loyal daughter-in-law who had been making coffee and silently supporting us, stepped forward. "I'll go," she said. We all turned to look at her. She had never been a combatant in our family wars. She was the peacemaker, the safe harbor. "Nobody is looking for me," she continued, her voice steady with a resolve I had seldom heard from her. "I'm not a Davies by blood. I'm just a mother going to catch a bus to visit her sister in the next town. No one will look at me twice." She was right. Her normalcy was her armor. It was an immense risk, but it was the only move we had left on the board. 2 hours later, Jessica, wearing a wig and glasses, walked into the bustling bus station. We, the family, were gathered around the burner phone in our kitchen, waiting in an agonizing silence. Every minute that passed was a torment. Finally, the phone rang. "I have it," was all Jessica said. "I'm on my way out." When she returned, safe, and placed the small flash drive on the table, it was as if the very air was changing. We plugged it into David's laptop. And what we found made us understand the true nature of the game we were in. It wasn't just ledgers of laundered money. It was videos, secret recordings from Stefan Varga's office. And in them, sitting, laughing, accepting bribes, was a figure that made all of our blood run cold. Federal Judge Wallace, the most powerful man in the state judiciary. We understood everything. It wasn't just police corruption. It was the entire system, rotten from the top down. Judge Wallace protected the Vargas, and in return, the Vargas kept him wealthy and safe. To hand this flash drive to any authority would be like handing over our own death warrant, signed by the judge himself. We were checkmated. We had a nuclear bomb in our hands, but all of our enemies were inside our own government. I looked at the frightened faces of my children. They were looking for a way out, for a clever move. But I realized that the only way to win a rigged game is to break the board. I picked up the telephone. Not the burner phone. My own. I looked up a name. The name of an investigative journalist, a woman known for her relentless tenacity and her refusal to back down. No matter how powerful the opposition, she answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and impatient. "My name is not important," I said, my voice calm and level, the voice of a grandmother who could be calling to report a lost cat. "But the story I am about to tell you will redefine your career." I told her everything. The story of a pragmatic nurse, a patient with amnesia, a crime family, and the judge in their pocket. I gave her names, dates, and the case number. I could feel her skepticism, her disbelief. "That is an extraordinary allegation," she said coolly. "Without proof, it's just a story." "I agree," I said. "The proof for everything I've just told you is on a flash drive. The flash drive is inside a manila envelope in locker 217 at the downtown bus terminal." There was a pause. "How do I get the key?" she asked, the scent of the story of a lifetime now in her nostrils. And that is when I made my final move. "The Queen's move, that's the interesting part," I said calmly. "There are 3 keys to that locker. At this very moment, one is being delivered to your office by courier. The second is being delivered to the law firm that represents the Varga family. And the third, along with an anonymous tip, is on its way to the downtown police precinct." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. "The race is on," I said, and my voice held not a trace of fear. "May the person who wants the truth the most get there first." And then I hung up. Mary's voice shifts, becoming the warm narrator, concluding the story. And my dears, the journalist ran. She ran as if her life depended on it, because her career did. And she got there first. The story exploded like a supernova. Faced with public scandal, with a federal judge exposed on video, the Vargas' web of protection disintegrated. The federal investigation that followed, led from out of state, was merciless. Their empire crumbled. Catherine and Michael's names were cleared in the national outcry. My daughter, my brave, pragmatic daughter, returned to the life she loved, her heart no longer just logical, but whole. And our family, tested by fire, betrayal, and fear, found not just peace, but a strength we never knew we possessed. Thank you for staying with me through this surprising end. What a lesson, is it not? Sometimes the most powerful move is not to attack the enemy, but to light a light so bright that there are no more shadows for them to hide in. Tell me what you thought in the comments below. And perhaps next time I should tell the story of Jessica, the quiet woman who walked into the center of the bus station and saved us all, proving that the most silent heroes are often the greatest of all. Until then, be well, and remember to look at the chessboard from a different angle. You might be surprised by the move you see. Inside the evidence warehouse was a cathedral of forgotten sorrows. Towering shelves, 10 times the height of a man, stretched into the gloom, creating long, dark aisles. It was a cold, sterile labyrinth holding the final mundane artifacts of 1,000 violent stories. Sealed bags containing clothing, jewelry, weapons, letters. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, plastic, and the faint metallic tang of dried blood. "Left here," Benjamin whispered, his voice a dry rasp over the phone line. His artist's mind, accustomed to seeing shapes and patterns in chaos, was a better map than the one Silas had drawn. Samuel followed, his steps heavy, his head on a constant swivel, every shadow a potential enemy. I sat in the car, a statue carved from tension. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I was their lookout. My job was to watch, to warn them. It was the most helpless I had ever felt in my life. Aisle 17. Benjamin breathed. The tag says homicide and major crimes. This is it. I glanced at the dashboard clock. Its green glow was unnaturally bright in the darkness. At 48 a.m., 7 minutes had passed. 7 minutes remained. "You have 8 minutes," I whispered into the phone, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. They found the shelf. It was high up. Samuel, the stronger of the two, had to climb the industrial shelving like a ladder, his feet searching for purchase on the cold metal. Benjamin stood below, directing him with hand signals. The box was tucked away at the very back. Samuel stretched, his fingers just brushing against the cardboard. He grunted with effort, and for a heart-stopping moment, I heard a metallic screech as his foot slipped. They froze. The sound echoed in the vast, silent space. I held my breath. Was the guard there? Had he heard? The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. After what felt like an eternity, Benjamin gave a quiet "okay," and Samuel resumed his climb. He grasped the box and carefully lowered it down to his brother. On the ground, they placed the box on the floor. "Case number matches," Benjamin confirmed. He pulled a small penknife from his pocket and slit the evidence tape with a surgeon's precision. 5 minutes, I warned. Inside the box lay the mundane remnants of a life's most violent moment. A man's wallet, a single leather shoe, and a heavy, dark wool winter coat. It was stiff with dried blood. Even through the phone, I could feel the grim reality of it. The cold evidence of the brutality Michael had survived. "The lining," Samuel urged, his voice tight with urgency. "Find the tear." Benjamin's fingers, so accustomed to the delicate work of a paintbrush, now frantically searched the blood-stiffened fabric of the coat's lining. "I can't feel it," he said, panic creeping into his voice. "The fabric is too thick." And then from my vantage point across the street, I saw it. The one thing that could not happen. A light flicked on in a distant window of the main precinct building. A silhouette moved. The guard. He was coming back early. "He's coming," I hissed into the phone. "The guard is coming back. Get out now." "We don't have the key," Benjamin whispered back, his panic palpable. "Leave it." "Get out!" There was a frantic, muffled conference. I heard Samuel's desperate voice. "We can't leave without it, Ben." "We don't get a second chance." Then, a decision. Benjamin's voice, suddenly clear and decisive. "Shove it in the bag." "The whole thing." "What?" "The whole coat, now." It was an act of pure audacity born of sheer desperation. They couldn't take the time to retrieve the key, so they would take the source. They stuffed the heavy, blood-stained coat into an empty duffel bag they had brought. They left the box and its remaining contents looking as undisturbed as possible. But the missing coat was a gaping hole in the evidence, a screaming alarm that would be discovered the moment someone looked. "Go," I commanded, watching the guard's light get closer as he began his slow walk toward the annex. I heard them running, their footsteps echoing through the warehouse, then the groan of the faulty loading bay door. A moment later, 2 dark figures burst from the shadows of the building and sprinted down the street. I started my car, the engine turning over with a soft, reassuring rumble. 2 blocks away, I saw the flicker of headlights as Eleanor pulled away from the curb, her sons safely inside. I watched them disappear into the night. They were out. They were safe. They had the coat. For a single glorious second, I felt a wave of triumphant relief, but it was fleeting. The relief was immediately replaced by a cold, hard dread. They had not just retrieved an item. They had stolen a major piece of evidence from a federal case. Before, we were hiding. We were ghosts in the system. Now, we had kicked the door down and announced our presence. The moment that missing coat was discovered, this would no longer be a quiet hunt by a corrupt police force. It would become a massive official manhunt. Every cop in the state would be looking for the people who had committed this audacious crime. Our window of time had not just shrunk. It had slammed shut. The quiet war of shadows was over. The real war, the one fought in the harsh light of day, was about to begin.